Please turn with me to Proverbs, start at 31, since that's where the scripture reading was from. As we look at the subject this morning, moms, and I guess it's appropriate for Mother's Day to talk about moms, but it struck me that as we were going through the Bible, it was almost perfect timing that if I wouldn't have been delayed by a week, this would have been the exact chapter that we were supposed to be on at this time as we are going through the Bible. So I'm preaching it anyway. Because being a week behind helped me also see that chapter 23 has a lot to say about this particular occasion, and even more going back to chapter 9, which is why I had a problem deciding where to start. So let's start at chapter 9 as you hold your finger at Proverbs 31. Please go back with me to Proverbs chapter 9 as we look at the subject of moms. As you turn, I'll remind you that we saw the first 7 chapters looking like it was Solomon talking to his son, giving him wisdom, often about the way that he should be with women. And by the time he got to chapter 9, he was no longer talking to his son about a physical woman. He seemed to be talking about wisdom personified, along with folly personified. And in the young adults class, we talked this morning about the way in which, as Barry is going through the Revelation, you see a lot of sevens describing the throne room of God. 7 flames in front of his throne described as the 7 spirits of God. Before you even get there, though, you've got Christ standing, talking to John, with 7 stars in his hand. Those are the 7 churches, right, in the midst of 7 lampstands. But it gets complicated by the time you get to chapter 12. Why? Because we've got a dragon. How many heads does he have? Oh, he's got 7 heads. And as you will see in the scripture from time to time, Paul will offer warnings about the whole concept of something Sun Tzu talked about in The Art of War, and that is, all war is deception. And so if you see God coming in the image of fill in the blank, don't be surprised if you see the enemy coming in the image of fill in the blank. And thus you have Proverbs chapter 9 where you have wisdom described as a woman. But by the time you get to the end of Proverbs chapter 9, you also see folly described as a woman. But how to distinguish? And that's what we talked about in the first few verses. In the first few verses, one of the things that stood out was wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has set her table, and she has sent out her young women to call. We contrasted. Okay, how do you begin to be able to distinguish wisdom from folly? And he said it was, quite simply, she was productive and industrious. The first thing to maybe understand on Mother's Day is there are a lot of things that mothers are not. But maybe you will help to make this a great Mother's Day if you recognize Mom for what she is doing. Start there. And why did I say start there? Why? Because it's easy in life to focus on the things we don't have, the things that aren't going right. But Proverbs 31 will help us to understand that as you look at the entire chapter, it's a great passage. It sounds so poetic when I listen to it or when I read it. As one of our sisters mentioned in the young adults class, it's preached an awful lot. And so I'm taking a chance by trying to preach it today. But once again, if we just keep it simple, I think if you turn back to Proverbs 31, we will see a lot of similarities just in scanning the chapter, not even going through it fully, beginning at verse 10. An excellent wife who can find. She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night, and she provides for her household. It's going to keep on like that for a while. Why? Because once again, as we are now at the end of the book of Proverbs, the 2 things that the woman, wisdom, and the wife of noble character have in common is the fact that she's industrious. And here's the thing. The more you go through this list, the more you start to realize, wait a minute, if I'm being objective and fair, we don't always have an instant corollary for somebody who's working with their hands at the spindle or making good use of flax. I'm from the city. I don't know about all that. But I do know about a woman who is not only industrious with her hands, but she organizes well. She has a staff that she is leading by example, and they're not just idly working, but they're bringing the money in. And after a while, I hear of all the results of all the things that she's doing, and I start to get a little bit intimidated. So I begin to realize this is a tough standard to compare an actual woman to. And so maybe the second thing to understand on this Mother's Day is maybe one way to make it a little bit easier for mom is don't set up an artificially high standard of comparison. So after you give your gifts, after you take up mom for lunch or dinner or wherever it is you're going, and now you got to go back and live out the week, like we started to celebrate birth weeks. Maybe you make it an even better Mother's Day if during the days going forward, you let her live according to a healthy understanding of what it actually is to be a real woman, trying to juggle all of these different responsibilities. Why? Because how does the chapter end? It says, verse 29 from our reading, many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. Think of it like this, fellas. For me, it's looking at a man who is able to come in maybe at 6'3", 6'4". Six-pack is in the rearview mirror because he now has an 8-pack. And he's not only bringing in a little bit of money, he's bringing in maybe a stack a week, maybe about $1 million a week. Translation from the hood to $1 million a week. That's just something I can't compare to. And so maybe that's what it's like when it's trying to compare a real woman to the wife of noble character. But understand, he's not saying compare her to anyone else. He's just saying give her the credit for what she has done. And on Mother's Day going forward, maybe it will help us out if we honor mom with not only the gifts, but the credit for what she has done. And going forward in our relationships, whether it's mom or wife, or maybe even daughter, who's an aspiring mom one day. Daughter can see you appreciating mom for what she has done and for what she is committed to doing. Maybe it will set a healthy example of what a reasonable man, eligible man looks like for her going forward. Why is it important? Well, because it's mutual, right? Mother's Day is a day off, but you got to go back to work too. Maybe we help make it easier for the fellas if we don't simply say, yeah, that's too tough a standard, and we boot it. But we keep the standard as a goal. And just as with most goals, if they're too easy to attain, they're probably not worth having. But we don't get rid of them. And so maybe the wife of noble character is something that we can say is maybe akin to that man who's got the 8-pack and he's at 6'4", and he's bringing in $1 million a week. But it's okay if we not get rid of that standard, but instead of using that as a standard for comparison, use it kind of as a goal. And so let's have some goals that are a little bit larger than what we are. Why? Because we say it all the time. Life gets pretty boring. I've already accomplished all I can do. That's when I begin to become, like we said, a little bit too confident. We begin to take one another for granted. Part of the joy in life is being able to appreciate what you have. So we are going beyond simply appreciating what we have, and we are mutually saying, I want to get better today. We're making it easier on, like we said, it's not just the wife that's talked about in this passage, it's talking about the husband. How does he respond? He praises her. Why is it? Because when he goes to sit at the gate, and he is talked about as or received as a man of wisdom, he's not going home to a woman who's acknowledged for folly. They're a pretty good couple. And so his reputation is a great fit with her reputation, and not just the past, but what they're known for doing going forward. So all they have to do is just be them, because they found a great parent. And are they in a home where the kids are acting a fool? No. Because God willing, it's not just, their wisdom isn't just so that they can sit at the gate, but it's they can create a holistic picture of something that's not perfect, right? But one of the great values or joys in life. The degree to which I talk about from time to time. People I admire in life, and as a young, insecure boy growing up in Houston, trying to find his way, I'm going to become a man. Well, maybe I'll play football. put you in a situation where you got to be a little bit more physically, whatever, you got to develop physically, right? But the people who I really started to emulate after a while, thank God, were the people who were secure enough, we say from time to time, to even if they weren't the captain on the football team, they didn't have to do everything perfect. And so one of the reasons why they were so confident is because as a captain of the football team, they were trying to help you set the example of how to recover just as well as they set the example of how to do whatever it was that made them the captain, what made everybody want to follow them behind them in the first place. So understand that as we go forward together on this Mother's Day, we take the pressure off if 7 times pass. Beyond the gifts, beyond the things, those things are great. Please do all that. Please also appreciate mom. And mom, as you go forward, make it easier for them to appreciate you too. And back to verse 23, because there's some things that I think, chapter 23, because there's some things that I think that the young people can do to help make this a great Mother's Day as well. I'm going to stay on dads for a minute because I think it starts with dads, moms and dads. Because in chapter 23, verse 13, what I noticed when I was beating myself up for being a week behind and missing the Proverbs 31 week, I realized, wait a minute, it's talking a lot about the family here in 23 too, beginning in verse 13 and going at least through 28. It's going to say, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. Don't take that literally. There's ways you can do that. But understand that it's the discipline it's talking about. The discipline or the concept of the act of disciplining alone, reasonably done, is not designed to kill. And here's another thing we can possibly do as fathers or men. Of course, we're speaking as a single guy, but I got to see a few families. Is don't make mom always have to be the heavy. Make sure that in a household where no good kid's going to get raised without discipline, that you step up so she doesn't have to in times when she shouldn't have to. And so likewise, as we go forward beyond the gift giving, one of the things you can do to make Mother's Day last a little bit longer is to step up in the tough times, because it's not always easy. It's not always easy to be the bad guy. How would a preacher know? Anyway, moving on. The bottom line is there are things in life, fellas, that we have to do whether they're fun or not. And part of being a man is stepping up in situations where we'd rather just kind of let someone else handle it. And we don't always have to say, oh, let mom handle it. Sometimes if you know she is a hardworking, industrious, woman committed to excellence, you know she's just going to do it anyway. All you have to do, I heard this bit of wisdom at a previous stop in ministry. If I mess it up just enough, like you don't know. This one I know you know. I don't have to do it again. And so as we move forward, when there are things that we can get done, it's that whole concept of going back to the very basics. In the way that I want to be treated, that's probably the way I need to treat mom going forward. I don't need to drop the ball just so I don't have to pick it up anymore. She just wants to make sure it gets done right. And I've decided I'm going to do it a little bit less than right, so I'll have to do it at all. Candor is one of those things that establishes trust. So not only picking up the ball to make sure she doesn't have to pick it up, but establishing the kind of relationship where she can acknowledge that if you say you're going to do it, even if you mess it up, you're at least going to try. Hey, baked some cookies not too long ago. Mom knew I didn't know how to do it. I had at least planned out a batch of cookies for me before the batch of cookies everybody else had to eat. Because I at least wanted to make a legitimate try at getting them right, so mom could have the rest that she deserved, without having to be embarrassed at the cookies that came out of the Campbell house that day. So ultimately, a lot of times it's just in the trying that will help mom have more than just a good Mother's Day. Beyond that, it does move on. In verse 14, if you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. So beyond the not killing part, there is a value, productive value in the discipline. Now, verse 15 is going to turn to my son. My son, if your heart is wise, my heart too will be glad. My inmost being will exult when your lips speak what is right. That's when we start to talk about the more holistic look at what it is for mom to be able to simply go out and help with her head held high. Because it's not just dad who is living in a way that allows him to simply speak wisdom from the overflow. It is not simply mom who is living in a way that allows her to simply speak wisdom from the overflow. We talked about how rare it is in this age to find wisdom at all. When you find kindness and wisdom coming out of a whole family, I'm thinking that catches attention. And so it's one more time one of those things that speaks for itself. And so no matter where you come to Mother's Day today, it doesn't say that you got to start from the time that you're Solomon and you're going to be wise. No. That whole concept of repentance comes with a benefit. It's the restoration. Meaning God gets a whole lot of glory if he takes a cowardly kid and turns him into someone with a little bit of courage. How much more somebody with no more history than whatever you bring to the table today, and he turns you into whatever your potential could be. And so no matter what you find your family having been up until the day you showed up today, maybe trust God that the one who spoke it all into existence can turn you into something that catches attention for all of the right reasons. Let's talk about holistic, beyond Mother's Day. Decide from this day forward, baby, to commit your family to a walk that can make mom proud of you, happy. Not only what she's done at this point, but the potential that she sees in her entire family going forward. Continue on. Verse 17, let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Don't preach that. It preaches itself. Surely there is a better preach itself. I preach it so much in the short lessons. I say it preach itself. It can be super easy to envy. You don't call them sinners nowadays. Who uses sinners nowadays? I don't, outside of the pulpit. But when I'm talking about people who probably should use the term sinners, they want to talk to people who aren't already in church. I mean, it can be really easy to want to look in the next lane and just wish, whether the person's evil or not, or really wicked or not, I just want whatever somebody else has. I talked about that in previous weeks, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But understand how one of the other ways to take pressure off of mom goes back to what we talked about in Proverbs 31. Whether it is setting her up for a false comparison or dragging her along on a mission that really is designed to just give me something that somebody else has. Don't make her carry the burden of unhealthy ambitions. Because every additional thing our attention is scattered towards is one less thing that she's able to focus on. As a brother said before, he said, my brother said it'd be great to be able to live more than one lifetime because there's just not enough time in this one to do all the things that we can do. Understand how that affects you as a family on a practical basis. A lot of these proverbs I've been passing by talk about the way in which Satan is able to entrap the foolish in busyness. And so it's not the industrious kind of work that we see out of the woman wisdom in chapter 9 and the virtuous woman in chapter 34. It's just giving you too much to do. And it all seems like great stuff to do, but if you really do the math on it, how well are you actually progressing? And so some of wisdom is taking the burden off of her plate for things that she really shouldn't have to focus on. You're not so much shirking responsibilities, that's one thing. But now you're putting your family under too great a strain to do too much, when maybe it's just a good time to stop and ask God, is this something that we really need to be focused on? This is really beyond Mother's Day, really helping her to be the best that she can be. Verse 18, surely there is a future and a hope. You will not be cut off. Verse 19, hear my son and be wise, and direct your heart in the way. Be not amongst the drunkards. Stop there. Don't stop there. Keep going. Or among the gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty. We talked about it today. There are times in life when I want to preach the part of the passage I like without preaching the whole thing. Once again, understand the Bible's written in a certain way for a certain reason. Preach the whole counsel of God. Why? Because it's just the right thing to do? Because I don't need to be engaging in that doctrinal debate? No, because your kids are looking at how you handle the truth. And so ultimately, like we say, if you want to make it easy for your husband to praise you, make it easy for your kids to simply follow your example. Because one of the worst things we can do in life is tell our kids to tell the truth in a world that punishes telling the truth. And one of the only ways you can teach them the lesson of what it is like to really tell the truth is to have them see you go through the retaliation and the punishment that goes along with telling it the way it is uncut. So it's one thing to tell them just, go on, and make me proud. But it's another thing for them to see the reality of what telling the truth looks like. So by the time they're getting out there and we're telling them to tell the truth, they don't have, just say they have more than just our advice, but they have our example of what it really looks like. The reason why I try to stay away from too many military examples, because I like reading books about this, like The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I've never been in battle like that. And so there's only a certain point I can talk up to before it's just clear. I've been there. So that's the last thing we want to do. The last thing we want to do is send your kids out into a situation where they haven't been there. So we might not all go to war, but we all got to tell them we're going to be his. Really? We all got to tell the truth. So why not give them the best opportunity to make you proud by letting them see it in you? Tell the truth in all those instances. I'm going to pay the consequences because I want it to be easy for the law. Verse 22 goes into that whole concept of truth. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy truth and do not sell it. By wisdom, instruction, and understanding. Understanding that, a couple of weeks ago, I got a chance to see, I think it was a couple of weeks back, I got to see this program I flagged about these content creators. How it's the other side of folks who have a pretty big following, but they're just not where they would like to be. Or some who really made it big, but by the time you get to the end of the documentary, you start to see the way in which it started to plateau. It's on the other side of the curve. It's all young people. But this one caught my attention, me too. She ended up in what we call in the earlier studies in the Bible, in Psalms and maybe even Job, a prison of her own fiction. Because she ended up selling an image online that was not really who she was. But because she compromised the truth of who she was and began making a whole lot of money selling this image, she found herself in a prison of her own fiction. Afraid to leave the money behind, but the money was attached to her every day, having to get up and be fake. And over time, it got exhausted, even though initially it was super lucrative. And that is one of the reasons why the Bible tells us, once again, that whole concept of the aharit, the end from the beginning. See, God can seem super oppressive on the beginning because I have the money. It's right there. All I got to do is that. I'll do that. For how long? So when God gives us advice, even if it might seem like it's super, this is not that. On the beginning, He knows how long you can run and how well you can run under the weight that you are taking on to get that opportunity. Which is why Paul says, run with endurance the race set before you. So that when it says, buy the truth and don't sell it, it doesn't just seem like some lame advice from a king who was dead hundreds of years ago, thousands of years by now. There's a reason why he was the wisest king that we know of in the history of Israel. Because he knows the freedom of not locking himself in a prison of his own fiction. I'm guessing that as king, deciding in many cases over the years, by the time we get to the end of the Proverbs, this isn't Solomon anymore. He's not the only one who's realized that there's some prisons I'm glad God freed me from. There were prisons of my own fiction. One of the reasons why he's telling me to buy the truth and sell it not, because I don't always understand the full effect and compromise. Ultimately, I praise God for the time that the Proverbs said, He's given me the opportunity to learn from that young woman who was sharing her story online, so that I don't have to make the same mistake too. So the advice like buy the truth and sell it not starts to sound a little bit more practical than it did. It just seemed like it was telling me just to do this. Beyond that, upside, verse 24. Because once again, there's some ways to make mom and dad happy at times when you aren't even around. Father of the righteous will greatly rejoice. He who fathers a wise son will be glad in him. Let your father and mother be glad. Let her who bore you rejoice. So it's not just that concept of wisdom. There are a lot of super clever people out there that you wouldn't want to trust with fill in the blank. And so once again, Solomon is helping us understand. As a king, from a king's perspective, it's super cool to be smart. But beyond smart, trustworthy. One of those things that opens maybe more doors than smart people. So he's saying if you truly want to make mom and dad happy on this Mother's Day, beyond this Mother's Day, understand once again why it's not just telling the truth that's important. Keep you out of a situation that mom and dad will then have to bail you out of. How can you get out of this? Once again, we get in trouble, guess who comes to the rescue? I haven't said that out of experience. Now, of course I said that out of experience. One of the reasons why it's easy for me to say thank you on Mother's Day, because this run has not been perfect for me. There are times when Mom has come through to pick me up in those stages where I've stumbled. But it seemed like I should have been just running just fine in life. So likewise, no matter how many times you might have stumbled, no matter how many times Mom might have had to come to pick you up, there's no reason to be ashamed of that. I told one of the young people who's graduated up from WSU, they're talking about, yeah, I'm going to go back home to Mom. He's kind of ashamed. I was like, why are you ashamed of that? I was like, one of my buddies who went into a home with the least debt, he left law school and lived with Mom and Dad for about 7 years. Almost paid cash for his house when he got it. Because instead of incurring all that debt on the front end, he was willing to go home and stay with Mama when everybody else was flossing. You know what flossing means? Showing off. And so he ended up, so I said, hold your head up, bud. Go home and stay with Mama and save that money. Right? And be better off later on, because the more you save on the front end, the less she has to come rescue you later on in life. It's easy for me as an older to say, who cares what your friends think? I still care what they think. What? Don't give it too much weight. I got some beautiful young people in here, seriously. And it's been a great joy to work with them. They are off on a great foot. That's not just me pandering a little bit. But bottom line is, beyond this day, they seem like they're in a great position to make you a joy, make your heart rationally feel joy going forward. Young people, make it easy for Mom and Dad. I'm not caring too much what your friends say. Brother just got up and said, be careful, Brother Jordan. Understand what your kids are doing, right? Because it only takes once. Right? It used to be that it only took once to make an addiction. That only takes once for it to be a rap. Right? I can guarantee that's one of those things that it's easier the more you do one of these other things that they're talking about. I made jokes at that. Be careful who you're around with the drunkards and the gluttons, but your company makes it either a whole lot more difficult or a whole lot easier to do the things that you already, not even the things that you're tempted to do wrong. Your company makes it easier for you to keep stay with the things that you are tempted to do right. Because you've got a whole lot of problems already that you're going to face in life if we don't run into what we called before the unnecessary drama. And so the last thing you need to do is carry a healthy set of ideals and ambitions and a healthily crafted integrity into the company of people who are going to cause you to second guess that. Put yourself in the position of people who are going to second guess the wrong you want to do. Not people who are going to put you in a position of second guessing the right things that God has placed in your life. And maybe beyond this day, God will have a great dinner, and once again, a great cause for joy moving forward. Going back to Proverbs 31. Once again, realizing that you go and go in your own time. Study this list. Don't necessarily look at it from the perspective of all the things that it's talking about that she does that don't really relate to what we do now. Once again, look at it from the perspective of the types of things that she's getting done. She is the worker. I told you one of the greatest experiences I had working as a farmhand and a preacher at the same time. And I never gave enough credit to the wife in that household. Let's do it today since it's Mother's Day. There were times we had to do some interesting things on a farm. I remember one time we had to go clear an area, and Mrs. Farmer did not jump back from the snakes any quicker than anybody else did. Because I'm guessing that wasn't the first snake she saw, and I'm guessing that wasn't the first snake she had to deal with. Right? And so when I got a chance to see the farmer actually killing a rattlesnake before church one day, and I got a chance to see his wife wasn't any more scared of rattlesnakes than he was. I got a chance to see someone who had been in the habit of doing those things. Her works are still praising her through somebody she still kind of keep in touch. She hasn't spoken to in years. So when you look at that, there are some people who you have met who will still be singing your praises, whether they're using your name or not, because of the fact that they've been able to see you demonstrate an unusual level of courage. Situations. Because we say sometimes we're watching you even when you don't know. even beyond all these things that we were talking about, regarding how to make Mom's Day become a lifetime of joy. To understand that one of the reasons that the elders asked us to consider the invitation at the end of maybe every sermon, or hopefully in the course at least when it's appropriate, is the fact that probably the greatest thing you can do to make Mom happy is to make sure that you are not trying to figure out life on your own. And you have someone who is guiding you in the same way that if she is setting a healthy example, she will tell you, who has helped her through the difficult times. And she is one sister talking about it this morning. When she had to rely on the example she might have seen in her mother as to how to stretch a dollar, as to how to make things happen when they seemed hopeless. See, we can, like you say, sometimes I can act like that's happening under my power, but God will bring me back to a place where whether I'm admitting it right now or not, there was somebody who got me through those times. Somebody who had a wisdom that was beyond my understanding. Even my wisdom was pointless. Couldn't get me out of a bind. He began to open doors in ways that no human power or no connections could ever open. So when the elders ask us to consider baptism, even if you aren't ready to do that today, understand the best thing you can probably do for Mother's Day, to make the next Mother's Day even better, is in addition to getting your life in order now, submit yourself to the one who can make it better than you ever were able to do, than you ever will be able to do on your own. You understand? He'll at the cross.